This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is somebody who's a big favorite of many of you. He's a lawyer, he's a journalist, he's a good friend. He's been covering the Middle East and what's been happening there like nobody else. I'm really happy to have back as a guest on this show, Dimitri Lascaris, coming to us tonight from Montreal, Canada. Dimitri, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, my friend. It's been too long since I first met you in Crimea back in 2023, I believe it was.
So
hopefully we'll meet up again soon.
Well, you've been really busy in other parts of the world, and I understand that. So, Dimitri, I want to start off tonight with something that I don't know if I'm overreacting, but the United Nations Security Council unanimously approved Trump's proposal to depopulate parts of Gaza and to build a Trump-type 5-star resort on the Mediterranean, displacing, millions of people in Gaza. What was your reaction to this? And my second part of the question is, I was really stunned that Russia and China did not veto. They only abstained. What were your thoughts on that, Dimitri?
I guess the best way I could sum it up for you, Regis, is that in my mind, after having watched with horror this genocide, unfold over the past 2+ years, and the United Nations Security Council did nothing to stop it, nothing meaningful. I already was deeply skeptical about the United Nations, and I thought its credibility was hanging by a thread. For me personally, and I think for a lot of people, this resolution that was passed on Monday has put the nail in the coffin of the United Nations, certainly the UN Security Council. And why do I say that? I think the way you described this resolution just now, practically speaking, I think that's a fair description, because we all know what Trump's real agenda is. He, early in the genocide, he was not shy about saying that he wanted to turn Gaza into some kind of, Atlantic City style casino land that would involve the displacement. I mean, he openly called for the removal of Palestinians to other countries, starting with Egypt. And over time realized that that was not going to be achievable, at least in the near term. And so he transitioned into this thing, which doesn't specifically talk about Trump's originally stated goals. But if you read through the lines, that's I think exactly what this thing is designed to do. It's to enable Trump and Netanyahu to achieve their originally stated goals. So what does it say on its face? It says on its face that there's going to be a board of peace established. It doesn't specifically say that the U.S. president will be the head of that board of peace, but it endorses the Gaza peace plan that Trump put forward, the so-called peace plan, which does appoint him as the head of the board of peace. So basically what you have as a result of this resolution is a hierarchy of authority now governing in theory, governing the Gaza Strip. And at the very top of that hierarchy, that pyramid, is Trump, the man who, since January of this year, has enabled, facilitated, and defended Israel's genocidal rampage in Gaza. It's the most remarkable thing that the UN Security Council has put in charge of the crime site of a genocide, the ultimate perpetrator of the genocide. That's exactly what it has done. And the genocide is ongoing. It hasn't even ended. So it's basically empowered this lunatic war criminal who should be spending the rest of his life in a jail cell at The Hague to run the show until at least the end of 2027, at which point the Security Council will have to take action if it wants to prolong this regime. In addition, it requires and to me, this is the thing, Regis, that is most offensive. I just can't even find the language to express my disgust at this. It requires the so-called demilitarization of the Gaza Strip without saying anything about Israel's weapons. So basically, it is requiring the victims of genocide to give up their light weapons and allowing Israel, which possesses every means of destruction imaginable, including nuclear weapons, to retain its weapons, the perpetrator of the genocide to retain its weapons, and even to rearm, even to acquire more destructive weapons, if that is possible. This is exactly the opposite of what the UN Security Council would do if it gave a damn about human rights and international law. It would say that Israel has to be disarmed, the perpetrator of the genocide has to be disarmed, and the Palestinians get to keep their weapons until they're actually secure in their own state. That's what they would say, but they've done precisely the opposite. And they've also calling upon an international, what they call an international stabilization force to rule over the Palestinian people and to implement the demilitarization of the victims of the genocide. It doesn't specify what countries are going to make up that international stabilization force. But it does make clear that Israel's basically going to have a veto over which countries are in it, the perpetrator of the genocide. It doesn't guarantee the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. It contains no timeline for that to happen. It has some vague language about withdrawal of those forces being linked to the demilitarization of Gaza, which the Palestinian resistance groups have categorically rejected. And it puts, the administration of humanitarian aid essentially in the hands of the U.S. government through this Board of Peace. And it is the U.S. government that has allowed Palestinians to be starved by Israel, ever since March of this year, if not before then. So I guess the best language I can find to describe this resolution, Regis, is that it is the embodiment of evil. That's what it is. And like you, I really, I'm deeply disappointed that Russia and China did not veto this resolution. I mean, the U.S. and the U.K. and France have never hesitated to veto resolutions to pursue their own nefarious agendas. Here was an opportunity for Russia and China to employ the veto to do good, and they declined. Why they did that, I don't know. But I can tell you, it's not just me. A lot of people out there who had hopes that Russia and China would lead us into an era of respect for international law are now more skeptical than ever that that's going to happen.
Dimitri, I wonder, because I really was surprised that Russia and China did not just bomb that, veto it, with some really strong language. But then I had a second thought, and I wonder if Russia and China basically know that this is not going to happen. It's going to fall apart. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think that they are very skeptical that it's going to work. In fact, the Russian representative to the UN Security Council in a powerful speech, I'll give him this much, he gave a good speech. He signaled that they're skeptical that this is going to be implemented and it'll succeed. And I think they're exactly right about that. I think this is going to be a miserable failure. But it does enable the United States and Israel to prolong the genocide, potentially right up until the end of 2027. And that's enough time for them to kill more people. So I think that they are skeptical. I think they're right to be skeptical. But that doesn't alter the fact that until this resolution expires, Israel and the United States can do a lot more damage to Palestinians.
Yeah, it just doesn't stop. You mentioned the resistance groups. That has to be Hamas, the PLO, I would guess Yemen. Would you include Iran and maybe Iraq in that? What are your thoughts on, I mean, you stated that you thought that they were not going to disarm. Tell me a little bit more about how you analyze that.
Well, when I referred to resistance groups, I wasn't referring to the groups outside of Palestine itself. I think they will take their lead from. So when we're talking about Ansar Allah in Yemen, the Iranian government, the popular militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, I think they're going to take their lead from Palestinians, not Mahmoud Abbas, by the way, the corrupt collaborator, but by the resistance groups. And the resistance groups are unanimous. It's not just armed groups, it's civil society as well in occupied Palestine. There, if you exclude Mahmoud Abbas and his cabal of corrupt collaborators in the Palestinian Authority, there's unanimity in Palestine about rejecting this thing. And I think that as I say, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, Iran are going to follow their lead, as they should. And so ultimately, without buy-in from a majority of Palestinians, and I would say that the vast majority of Palestinians, probably in excess of 90%, are going to be hotly opposed to this thing, it is doomed to failure. It is absolutely doomed to failure. My concern is that there is going to be a lot of killing in the interim. This thing, this abomination, Regis, doesn't even reference what is happening in the West Bank, let alone attempt to deal with it in some way. There's a genocide happening in the West Bank too, and it's intensifying. Every single day, settlers, armed settlers in the IDF, the so-called IDF, are murdering Palestinians and displacing them and burning their olive groves and killing their sheep, torturing them even. They're killing children in the West Bank. They are destroying the refugee camps, largely have done that in the West Bank, including particularly Jenin. This resolution says nothing about any of that. So it's almost like an encouragement for Israel to escalate its crimes.
Dimitri, I want to establish something right away for the people who are viewing this. You're not speaking like so many of these bloggers. Many of them are, I call them rock stars. They've got millions and millions of views and millions of subscribers. They're sitting in an armchair somewhere in the United States of America. There may be a couple that are sitting in their armchairs in Europe or, wherever, maybe even in Russia. I want to make people aware that you have risked your life, really, over the last couple of years, traveling multiple times to all of these countries that are involved in this conflict. I'd like you to tell me a little bit about the coverage that you have provided over these last couple of years in the countries that you've been in, and the type of people that you've interviewed, the things that you've seen with your own eyes, and the things that you've made videos of with your own equipment. What exactly have you been doing there?
Well, it started, I think, about 3 days after this genocide began. This would have been the week of October 7th, 2023. I was I have a home in Greece, in the south of Greece, where I spend about half the year, and I was there with my wife. And I remember waking up the morning after October 7th and saying to her, I got to do something. I can't just sit here. I know what's coming. It's going to be horrible. It'll be far worse than anything that's ever been done to Palestinians. And by the way, I didn't imagine it was going to be this bad. Even I am shocked at how horrifying Israel's conduct has been. And so I just felt I had to do something. And with the support of my very patient wife, I got on a plane and I went to Beirut because Hassan Nasrallah, who was later murdered by the Israelis, the leader of Hezbollah at the time, called for what he called a day of rage. So for Lebanese people to take to the streets and to protest what Israel had embarked upon, which was a genocide. And so I flew to Beirut. I think it was October 10th or 11th. This is when the Day of Rage was called for. And I immediately went from the airport to the United States Embassy in Beirut, where this protest was centered. And when I got there, I literally just dropped off my suitcase at my hotel, didn't even bother checking in, and went straight to the U.S. Embassy. And when I got there, all hell had broken loose. And there were thousands of young protesters, mostly men. There were some women out there who were throwing rocks at the Lebanese army, who had formed a cordon across around the U.S. Embassy. There was a building on fire right next to the U.S. Embassy. There were rubber bullets being fired into the air. I didn't see anybody actually shot, but I did see one young man whose eye had popped out of his head because he had taken a tear gas canister to the face, and they were rushing him to the hospital. At one point, I got caught between. It was the most bizarre thing. Lebanese soldiers were picking up the rocks and they were throwing them back at the protesters. And so I got caught in this kind of hailstorm. I didn't have a helmet on. I was standing there with rocks going over my head, and I ran for cover, and hopefully and thankfully avoided injury. And later on that trip, I knew a couple of people in Lebanon who were excellent guides, and I persuaded them to take me to the southern part of the country, right up to the Israeli border, and where the hostilities had commenced. And I saw some of the destruction, and learned of the incredible steadfastness and courage of the Lebanese people in the face of Israeli aggression, and the solidarity that they were showing. They exposed themselves to Israel's wrath by, as Nasrallah put it, attacking the Israeli military and drawing its forces away from the Gaza Strip where the genocide was happening. And then over time, because I was so, I think, inspired by what I saw in the steadfastness and courage of the Lebanese people, I kept feeling drawn back to the region. And I ended up going 5 times in all to South Lebanon during the genocide. I decided to expand my my investigation into what was happening. I managed to get into Palestine during Ramadan in March of 2024. I visited the Jenin and Tulkarm refugee camps. I spoke to Palestinians in those camps who were the victims of Israeli atrocities. There was a point where, I was with my Palestinian friend and guide in Jenin, and there was an Israeli drone hovering right over our heads as we were inspecting a cemetery where they had laid to rest people recently killed by Israeli military forces. I went to Iraq. I met the leader of a popular militia who is a member of the Iraqi parliament. I think you can fairly describe him as the leader of the Iraqi resistance to American hegemony. I managed to interview the international relations spokesperson of Hezbollah. I attended the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah in February of this year. I was in Jordan most recently, and my reason in going to Jordan, this was about 3 weeks ago, was to try to get back into Palestine. And I tried to do that over the Allenby Bridge, which connects Jordan to the West Bank. And even though Israel's presence there is illegal, Israel controls the border crossing into the West Bank. And this time they barred me from entering. I made 2 attempts. I had to spend 10 hours waiting. And finally, an Israeli border official told me that they wouldn't allow me in. What he said was that the Israeli intelligence had recommended to him that I not be allowed into the country because I criticize Israel wherever I go. That's what he said to me, and I have it on tape. So I went back into Jordan, and I decided that I was going to do what I could to report on the ground in Jordan about how the country had been basically colonized by Israel and the United States. And so I decided to start my reporting by going to the Israeli embassy in Amman. And it was cordoned off, by security forces and fortified positions and so forth. So I got about 100 meters from the embassy, and I pulled out my camera and I started filming. I was immediately arrested, and I was thrown in a jail cell for the afternoon because they told me that I had violated the law by filming an embassy. And eventually I managed to get out of prison later that night by demanding that I be allowed to speak to the Canadian embassy and seek consular services. And so that alarmed them to the point where they decided to let me go after I deleted from my iPhone in front of them the video that I had taken in front of the Israeli embassy. I also have done reporting, although it's not strictly speaking in West Asia. As part of my reporting on this genocide, I've gone to Cyprus twice because there's been a huge influx of Israeli money and Israelis themselves into Cyprus. In many ways, the Israelis seem to be colonizing the island, something, by the way, that Zionists wanted to do for a very long time. I learned this in the course of my reporting, that going back to the 1800s, leading Zionists viewed Cyprus as a springboard to what they believed was the land promised to them by their God. And so in the course of doing that reporting, I went to a Jewish institution, which I read was catering to Israelis in Ladinika, which is on the southern coast of Cyprus. And I started filming outside of that institution. Even though I was on a public street, I was immediately swarmed by private security guards. And then when I was leaving the country 2 days later, I was interrogated by the Cypriot criminal division at the airport about what I had been doing in the country. And more recently, I tried to attend a speech here in Montreal, where Mark Carney, the current Canadian Prime Minister, was speaking, for the purpose of asking him, and by the way, I am a card-carrying member of the press, for the purpose of asking him some difficult questions about Canada's support for this genocidal Israeli entity. And I got manhandled by Montreal police when I tried to enter this posh hotel where Carney was speaking, even though I was no threat. They knew who I was. They knew I don't pose any kind of a threat to the Prime Minister. They just didn't want me getting anywhere close to him and asking him tough questions. And so my overall, impression from all of this, I have several, Regis, but I think that, in the space of 2 months, I've been barred from entering Palestine. I've been thrown in a jail cell in Amman. I've been interrogated by criminal detectives in Cyprus. I've been manhandled by Montreal police. I think this is just the beginning. I think that this is, and by the way, I'm just one of many independent anti-imperialist journalists who have experienced this type of thing, and others have experienced far worse than me. I mean, for God's sakes, the Israelis have outright murdered, something in the range of 140 journalists in Gaza with total impunity. So what I've experienced is by no means, it's not even remotely close to being the worst thing that journalists have experienced at the hands of the Anglo-American empire over the last couple of years. But I think it's going to get worse. And I think in particular, as one's audience grows, and thankfully we're very grateful about this, our audience on Reason to Resist has grown quite rapidly. As you become more visible to the public in terms of your advocacy for the oppressed and your condemnation of people in positions of power, the repression will escalate. And it's not just going to happen to me, it's going to happen to all people out there who are doing this kind of work and who are resonating with the public. So the way we should respond to that is by telling more truth. That is the best protection that we have.
Dimitri, do you have any intention of returning to the region? That's one of my questions. Do you have any intention of returning, and when will you plan to do that?
Oh, I will definitely return. I have to tell you, Regis, if I didn't really convey it in what I just said, I want to be very clear about this. When I go to West Asia, that is when I feel most hopeful about the future of humanity. And it may seem odd that I would say that because of all the violence that's being inflicted there, but what inspires me is the resistance. I just can't even begin to tell you how courageous these people are and how selfless they are. They're sacrificing. I mean, the Lebanese resistance didn't have to get involved in this genocide. Israel wasn't attacking them at that moment. In fact, its forces were diverted to Gaza, and yet they involved themselves and exposed themselves to this risk. The resistance groups in Iraq have also suffered at the hands of Israel because it supported the Palestinians. Ansar Allah and the Yemeni people have suffered enormously as a result of their support for the Palestinian people. So I will always go back to any part of the world where you see such selfless and courageous opposition to injustice. I'm not going to be able to get into Palestine for the immediate future, and maybe for the rest of my life, depending upon how long it takes to dismantle this apartheid regime. And probably wouldn't be a good idea for me to go back to Jordan anytime soon, but I'll definitely be going back to Lebanon. I would love to get into Yemen. I've been trying very hard to get there. Iraq, for sure. I also went to Iran in May. I'd very much like to go back there. This is a place that's very close to my heart, and I'm not going to give up on it. Never.
Tell me about your trip to Iran. What did you learn there?
So I was invited to attend a media festival called the Sobe Media Festival, and this was in May of this year. I was there. There were a number of other independent journalists who were there. For example, Max Blumenthal of the Gray Zone was there. A fellow who, and so was his wife, Anya Parampil, and another American independent journalist who has a program called Propaganda & Co. And we were basically given the opportunity to meet people in the Iranian state media and to meet with government officials. So, for example, we went to a museum. It wasn't really a museum. It was a facility which displayed Iran's missile capabilities. And we were given a tour of this facility by a brigadier general in the Iranian military who was part of its missile forces. So that was quite interesting. Then we got a tour of the nuclear reactor it's a research reactor in Tehran. So this is obviously heavily protected, and we got passes and we went in. And after getting a tour of this facility, we had the opportunity to sit down with the spokesperson of the atomic energy ministry in Iran. And he spoke to us for about an hour, and then we had the opportunity to ask him questions, and there was no limitation placed on the questions we could ask him. And so that was very enlightening. And then for me, maybe the most enlightening thing of all was I decided that I just wanted to go explore Tehran on my own without any guide, anybody. And I got on the subway. It has an incredible subway system. It's quite impressive. And just started traveling to various parts of the city to see how the people of Tehran live. And what I saw, Regis, is radically inconsistent with what I had been told about Iran. So, for example, I saw women everywhere in Tehran who didn't have any headwear. There were none of them. I mean, I would estimate that roughly 40% of the women I saw in public were not wearing a hijab. And oftentimes I saw women who weren't wearing a hijab walking alone. And I never saw any of these women. I saw this repeatedly over the course of the week that I was in Tehran, by the way. It wasn't just when I went off on my own in the streets of Tehran. And I saw nobody harassing them. I didn't see any officials harassing the women who weren't wearing head covering. I didn't see any private citizens harassing them. They just looked like ordinary citizens. People there do dress modestly, including the women who don't wear head covering. So you saw very few men or women, frankly, wearing provocative clothing. So they dress modestly, but the idea that if you're a woman and you don't cover your head in Tehran, they're going to kill you or imprison you, is radically inconsistent with what I saw. I just saw no evidence of that at all. Now, maybe it was that way once. I can't say. I can only tell you what I saw when I was there. The other thing I saw was that it was a city that was, it looked reasonably prosperous. It didn't look to me at all like a poor city. It seemed like a very well-organized city. There's a lot of traffic in that city because it's population, I think, of around 10 million people. But it still seemed like a very well-organized city by Western standards. And one of the two things that really stood out for me, aside from the fact that there were so many women who didn't have head covering, is I didn't see a single cop with a firearm. This blew me away. I saw hardly any cops at all. The very few that I saw, I probably saw less than 10 in total in a city of 10 million when I was there. And they were traffic cops. And I didn't see any weapons on them at all, not even handguns. So that was one thing that really stood out for me. I also didn't see hardly any military personnel, uniformed military personnel. And in many respects, the city had a kind of Western flavor to it. Although you could tell you weren't in the Western world, there were parts of the city that seemed very familiar to me, having grown up in the West. And the other thing I noticed is I didn't see a single homeless person, not one. And now, nowadays, Regis, I don't know how much time you spend in the West nowadays, but what I'm about to say goes for every major Western city I've been in the last 20 years, and I've been in a lot of them. I've been in major Western cities all over Canada and the United States. I've been in major Western cities all over Europe. And in every single one of them, without exception, I see homeless people and heavily armed police all the time, all over the place. Every major Western city. I didn't see any of that in Tehran. No. I think it's fair to say that what we've been told about that country is just a filthy, stinking pile of lies.
I appreciate that analysis and that reporting, Dimitri. You mentioned you've been trying very hard to get into Yemen. What's the problem getting in there?
Well, first of all, the Yemenis themselves are very, I think, careful about who they allow into the country for obvious reasons. But the people in Nasser Allah know who I am, and I know this because I've actually interviewed the international spokesperson of Ansar Allah on my program. And getting that interview, he wouldn't have given me that interview if he didn't think that I was a fair-minded journalist. So I don't think they regard me as a security risk per se. Other people may have that question. The problem is just practically getting in there. So you, first of all, in order to get there's only one airline that flies in and out, as far as I know, of Yemen, and it's the Yemeni National Airline, or it might be Middle East Airlines. It's some Middle Eastern airline. And there's only like 3 or 4 flights a week. And in order for you to buy a ticket, you have to have a visa not only from Ansar Allah, from the government that's presiding over the part of the country that's controlled by Ansar Allah, but you also have to get a visa from the Saudi puppet, which is the internationally recognized government of Yemen. I don't even know how to get that visa, but if I tried or applied, I doubt they'd give it to me because of my reporting on the region. So only when I have both of those visas, I actually did get approved for a visa by Ansar Allah, by the authorities in Sana'a, the capital, but I haven't gotten a visa from the Saudi puppet, and without that, I can't get a plane ticket. So that's the bar, but I'd love to go there.
Well, I hope that it works out for you, because I think the whole, well, I say the whole world, but millions of people would love to hear from you about what it's like there. They have been incredibly brave people and resilient, and the United States and others have just bombed the crap out of them, and yet they still keep fighting, and they're backing up the Palestinians like almost nobody else. All right, I want to stay on the subject of Palestine and what happened in Canada recently, that you covered this story. Was it legislation to recognize Palestine, to raise the flag over the? Can you tell me what happened there?
Yeah, so the background is that Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, as I like to call him, otherwise known as Mark Carney, announced alongside the British and the French in late, about 3 or 4 months ago, that Canada was going to recognize the state of Palestine. Now, he attached to it a number of conditions which have not been fulfilled. But nevertheless, for whatever reason, Global Affairs Canada, which includes the Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, recently confirmed in writing that Canada's recognition of the state of Palestine is effective. I don't believe that you need legislation to do this. This is something that the executive branch of the government can do. It simply has to issue some kind of statement, order in council, whatever. And it did that. So now, for purposes of Canadian law, Palestine is a state. So an organization called the International Center of Justice for Palestinians, which is based in the UK but has a Canadian branch, then went to Toronto City Hall. Toronto is the largest city in Canada, and applied for a permit to have the Palestinian flag raised at City Hall. And it just, invoked the normal flag raising procedures of Toronto that have been in place for many years as a basis for doing this. And, because the Canadian government had recognized Palestine, There was no legitimate reason for City Hall to reject the request. So they agreed to do it. And it was scheduled to be done at November 17th. That was Monday of this week at 9 a.m. local time. And then late last week, a few days before this was to happen, this lunatic organization called Tafsik, Tafsik, which is run by a fanatical Zionist, Amir Epstein. And really, I would say it's fair to describe him as far-right, extremist, pro-genocide, you name it. He hires a lawyer to seek an emergency injunction prohibiting the Toronto City Hall from raising the Palestinian flag. And he files an affidavit, which I've reviewed, and it's just full of a pack of lies about, ICJP, the organization that asked for this flag raising to happen, about supporters of the Palestinian cause in Canada and so forth. And then the court schedules a hearing to take place at 8:30 a.m. On Monday morning. And members of the public were able to observe the hearing. So I logged on and I watched what happened. There was about 30 minutes of argument. The judge said very little. He just basically listened. Although the other side, the lawyer for ICJP, who's a friend of mine who's working with me on some other legal matters relating to the Palestinian cause, his name's Shane Martinez. He was very pointed in condemning them. He said that their papers were full of anti-Palestinian racism, scurrilous lies about his organization, baseless assertions, unsupported allegations. And at the end of the day, I think the judge, although the judge didn't explain the reasons for rejecting the application, he will do that, by the way. He just didn't have time to do it that morning. So we're going to see his reasons sometime in the next few weeks. But he just issued a one-statement rejection of the application at something like 9:45 a.m. So they ended up raising the flag at around 10:30. They delayed it a little bit. There were hundreds of people out there cheering wildly. There was a small group of people who remain, for reasons that boggle the mind, committed to supporting Israel even today after 2+ years of genocide. But there were very few of them. There was no incident. And, I think that this is just one piece of evidence amongst many that there is a massive shift in public opinion in the West, not just in Canada, in the West, in relation to Western support for Israel and Israel itself. And from what I can see, Regis, there is a full-blown collapse in public support for Israel in the West unfolding before our very eyes. And it's being exacerbated by a variety. It's not just Israel's atrocious crimes, which have been so carefully documented. It's the Epstein files. It's the killing of Charlie Kirk and all the suspicions around whether or not Israel may have had a hand in the killing of Charlie Kirk. It's things like an Israeli government official going to Las Vegas. I don't know if you're aware of this, and being caught red-handed trying to have sex with a minor. And this Israeli government official was allowed to leave the country and return to Israel, and he ain't coming back. This kind of stuff, this accumulation of all of this is causing real outrage in the West, in particular the United States, about American support for Israel. And that spells real trouble for Israel.
Well, I can only hope so. I think that I have very limited exposure about what you just described as happening in the West, but especially in the United States in terms of the pushback. But I do see a little bit, and it does look like a lot of people are waking up to the fact that the United States has been complicit in this. You mentioned this Epstein thing that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. The Charlie Kirk assassination in public with the connection to Israel, I mean, who benefited most from that? I sure hope that it continues to accelerate, especially in the United States. I think people need to get out into the streets. They need to march on Washington. nonviolent, massive nonviolent, peaceful protest that, everybody from Gandhi to Martin Luther King have believed in is the only thing that can change the system. So we'll have to watch that very carefully. I know that you and I have talked about Israel probably not being able to survive too much longer into the future as a state because of they've really been isolated, I think, and I'd like to know if you would agree, by the rest of the world. It looks like the only ones that are really helping them are the United States and some of its vassals. Would you agree with that?
I think Israel's toast. It's absolutely toast. Back in October and November of 2023, within weeks of the genocide beginning, I wrote a two-part article on my website in which I predicted that Israel was going to suffer strategic defeat. And the basic thesis of my article was very simple. And the thesis was, it wasn't the only reason I said Israel was going to suffer strategic defeat, but the main reason why I put forward that argument is that Israel is existentially dependent upon Western support, and particularly US government support. And one of two things was going to happen as all of this unfolded, and maybe both would happen. First of all, people would rebel against Americans themselves, and Westerners more broadly would rebel against Western government support for Israel. And the elites can only get away with so much. At a certain point, when popular opposition to a government policy becomes great enough, they have to change course whether or not they want to. And which is, by the way, exactly why governments spend so much time, energy, and money trying to manipulate public opinion, because they know that if there's enough opposition to what they're doing, they just can't have their way. They're going to have to accommodate the public. So either that was going to happen, or the West was going to suffer itself a strategic defeat, including and in particular in Ukraine, and it would become so weakened by its own strategic defeat that it would no longer be able to provide to Israel the requisite degree of support. And everything that I see today, Regis, happening in the world, all the way from Ukraine to the South China Sea to sub-Saharan Africa, other parts of West Asia, have persuaded me that that prediction was absolutely correct. It's just a question of when, not if. Even if the US government can overcome popular outrage, growing, intensifying popular outrage of support, US government support for Israel, the US government is in a world of hurt. The United States is in a world of hurt. It is militarily very weakened. It has become completely discredited. The economy is in serious trouble. A financial crisis could erupt in the United States at any moment. Its debt is spiraling out of control. Even though Trump and the Republicans love to talk about fiscal responsibility, they are just as guilty as anybody about miring the United States in unpayable amounts of debt. There's tremendous amount of violence and disunity in U.S. society. Healthcare is becoming increasingly and prohibitively expensive. I could go on and on. Poverty, inflation. This is a country that has really serious, profound problems, and it has a leadership that is doing everything possible to exacerbate them, to actually make them worse. So Israel, because it is hitched its wagon to American power, and is entirely dependent upon U.S. and other Western government support for its very survival, is doomed just for that reason alone. And it's just a question of when.
People here in Russia obviously are not focused very much on the Middle East. There's very little. I'm looking at RT right now and Sputnik and TASS. Everything of late has been about Ukraine, whether it's the progress of the special military operation, Russian troops breaking through the front in multiple places. And of course, the big story is the corruption, the recent scandal. We'll talk about that in a second. But the thing that I find not only my Russian friends, but some of my friends and colleagues in academia cannot get their heads around what you just said about the imminent economic collapse of the United States. I always add to that, it's not only the economic collapse, it's the societal collapse, the moral collapse of the United States. You know, you hear them talk a little bit about LGBTQ in Europe and, you know, how Russia is fighting and has been fighting against that. But they just can't seem to believe that things are that bad in the United States. Now, let's transition to my part of the world. As just about everybody that follows me knows that I'm in the Russian Federation in Yalta. You visited here, and you visited the Donbass. We took you up to the border. You did a lot of interviews with refugees coming across. The focus here is on Ukraine. And, you know, people aren't even talking, the regular, ordinary people are not even talking about a possible peace deal that Trump has been trying to broker with Russia. You know, I have some friends, and I wrote an article that was published on a website here in Russia, arguing that based on the history of the relationship between Russia and the United States going back to the American Revolution, through the war with England, 1812, the Crimean War, the American Civil War, the Russians, the Empire, were helping the United States against the British Empire. And they were using that as kind of an argument of hope, that based on the past, there was hope for a rapprochement with the United States. And I argued there's no chance of that, because it's not Donald Trump, it wasn't Joe Biden, it wasn't Barack Obama, it wasn't the decider himself, George Bush. None of these people are in charge of United States foreign policy. And I argued that nothing was going to change. And I also argued that President Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have said publicly that the President of the United States is not in charge. They know that. And that they've focused and turned to the East. Now, I want to talk to you about what's happening in my part of the world. You have been interviewing an incredible journalist, John Helmer, who's been reporting from Moscow for I don't know how many years now, but many, many, many. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the interviews you've had with him? And they've really been twofold. You've been covering the special military operation, and you've been covering the scandal. Let's begin with the scandal. What have you learned from your interviews, and I've seen them with John Helmer, what have you learned about the scandal in Ukraine? Will it topple the government? And it looks like, from what I'm reading right now on my other monitor here, I mean, almost every article is about the corruption scandal and who's going down. Do you think that Zelensky might also go down?
I think that's a definite possibility. Interestingly, John, who is the longest serving foreign correspondent in Moscow, and has a deep, deep knowledge of the country. He's been an advisor to governments. He is Harvard educated. He's been a professor of journalism. So he is a wealth of knowledge and understanding about the Russian Federation and its people. He seems to believe that this isn't going to result in the demise of Zelensky. I think time will tell. I think there is a real risk that this is going to bring about the demise of Zelensky. But John makes the point that this current scandal, which apparently involves about $100 million, is peanuts compared to the overall level of corruption in Ukraine. So, for example, I think he would point to, and certainly I think of the corruption scandal involving Ihor Komoloisky, who played, a Ukrainian-Israeli oligarch who played an incredibly important role in the rise of Zelensky. He was essentially the person who funded this television program that made Zelensky famous, Servant of the People, where he played the role of the Ukrainian president, crusading against corruption in the country. And Komolowski was charged in a multi-billion-dollar bank fraud by the U.S. government, no less. And he took off, and he was actually hiding out in Israel for a while to avoid arrest. He ended up somehow going back, or for some reason going back to Ukraine, at which point the Ukrainian regime threw him in jail for corruption charges there. John thinks that the reason why they did that is because Komoloisky was basically agitating for an end to the war. He had come to the conclusion that Ukraine was going to lose, that the country was in the process of being destroyed. And I think probably for entirely selfish reasons, like he has a lot of assets in Ukraine, some of which could be confiscated by the Russian Federation after this war is completed. Whatever his motivation, John says he began to, basically advocate for some kind of a deal with the Russian Federation to end the war. And that's why they ultimately decided to go after Komoloisky. And he seems to think that ultimately what this is going to do is it's just going to give Western governments these corruption allegations, newer ones, because it's not the first time with Zelensky by any means. These newer corruption allegations are just going to give more leverage to Western governments over Zelensky. And there was an interesting spectacle, after this latest corruption scandal exploded, where Emmanuel Macron, the French president, came to Ukraine and with much fanfare signed some kind of memorandum and understanding with Zelensky for the purchase of 100 fighter jets, Mirage fighter jets, which haven't yet been manufactured by the French defense industry. Why would he do that unless he intended to, prop up Zelensky? And at the same time, again, within days of this latest corruption scandal exploding, the German government, the Nazi Friedrich Merz, because that's what he is in my opinion, announced, a $13 billion US $13 billion aid package for Ukraine for 2026. This is within days of this happening. So it seems like the Western backers of Zelensky are doing everything they can to continue to prop him up. They're not ready to throw him under the bus, but this will make him more vulnerable to them. Now he's more dependent than ever on their support. And what they want is they want him to continue, I think, whoever the leader of Ukraine is, whether it's Zelensky or anybody else, they want that person to continue to send young Ukrainian men to the front line to be chewed up like cannon fodder. That's all they care about. They want to keep this thing going as long as possible to avoid, they don't care about corruption. If they cared about corruption, they never would have supported Zelensky or anybody like him to begin with. They actually exploit the corruption in Ukraine. That's how they get their way, right? So they all they care about is keep this war going and avoid as long as possible the obvious, acknowledging the obvious, which is that Ukraine and NATO have been defeated.
Yeah. Well, there's two motivations. One, the money. They're making lots of money on keeping this war going. And number two, that crowd of people in the West, in Great Britain, in the United States, even Israel, really want to see Russia weakened. And so that's my view on why they want to keep this going and why there's not going to be any peace deal. And before we finish now, we have a few minutes left. I want your thoughts on this possible Trump brokered peace deal. And I'll start out by saying I don't see how Russia, Putin in particular, can make any deal that is going to compromise any of the three stated goals for the special military operation: demilitarization, denazification, completely neutral, no NATO Ukraine, and, as Putin and Lavrov have kept saying, that the root causes of the conflict have got to be resolved. Those go back to 1991 and the encroachment, the advance of NATO surrounding Russia. What are your thoughts on the possibility of a deal?
This was always a pipe dream, Regis, in my opinion. There's probably been no president in my lifetime of the United States who's talked as much about peace as Donald Trump. Certainly within the last year, going all the way back to the beginning of the presidential campaign. But his, rhetoric is radically contradicted by his entire record, going all the way back to, his first administration, when he was the first United States president to send lethal weaponry to Ukraine. Even Obama didn't do that. He didn't renounce the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. He supported that during the first administration. He pulled the United States out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia, which was an extremely dangerous and provocative move. Under the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, the U.S. military was conducting very provocative military exercises with the Ukrainian military. And Ukraine, proceeded to become what was effectively a de facto member of NATO under the first Trump administration. And then there's all the horrible, violent, criminal things that Donald Trump did outside of Ukraine, and in particular in West Asia. So the man's record is one of a bloodthirsty, psychopathic warmonger. Why anybody believed that this dude was serious about peace is a mystery to me. I think it was largely wishful thinking. And why did he do it? Why did he say, I'm going to bring peace? Because he wanted to win the election. It's as simple as that. There's so many people in the alternative media. It blew my mind. And even to this very day, Regis, there are people I'm not going to name, I don't want to embarrass them, who are doing the tour of these, large alternative media platforms, many of which I respect and I watch, and they continue to believe that Donald Trump actually personally desires peace in Ukraine. He wants to bring the war to the end. He really does care about all those young Ukrainian and Russian men who are dying and being disabled. They still cling to this belief, and they think that, the reason why he doesn't want to do it is because he's got Marco Rubio around him and Mike Waltz and all these characters who are bloodthirsty neocons. Well, he put them there. He put them in those positions. Nobody put a gun to his head and said, you have to appoint bloodthirsty Russophobic neocons to be your close advisors and members of your cabinet. But he did that. And it was a sign from the very beginning that he was never serious about peace. And this has all been proven in spades ever since he returned to the White House. Okay, Pete Hegseth, immediately after the Trump returned to the White House, he goes to Brussels and he gives this big speech to the European vassals of Washington. And he says to them, look, we have limited resources. We need to focus our attention, we, the United States, on China and West Asia, and you need to pay the bill for funding the war in Ukraine, and we're more than happy to supply the weapons, but you're going to have to buy them from us. And so for that purpose, you need to jack up your military spending to this insane level, and completely unachievable level, by the way, of 5% of GDP, which all of those little vassals immediately did, without any public consultation, without any meaningful parliamentary debate. They immediately committed their countries to this ruinous level of military spending. Why? Because Washington told them to do it. And they told them to do it for the purpose of funding the Ukrainian war. At that stage, it should have been obvious to everybody that Trump was a bald-faced liar. And we've seen this now in Technicolor. He has absolutely no interest in addressing Russia's core concerns, the one you just identified. He wants to stop the conflict at the current lines so that Ukraine, which is in full-blown retreat, basically, it's collapsing before our very eyes, can be rearmed, can remobilize, and can build new fortifications to continue the war on a better footing. That's what he wants. And fortunately for the Russian people, their government understands that that's exactly what's going on.
Dimitri, an amazing 1 hour. Thanks so much. Got to have you back. I know you're busy, but I got to head back. Thanks again, my friend.
My pleasure. Anytime, Regis.